Hey everyone, today we're talking about one of the most interesting and intense movements in history, the Hussites. This story takes us back to medieval Europe, where a bold reformer named Jan Hus sparked a movement that shook the foundations of the Catholic Church and ignited a series of wars. So, let's get into it. Hussites were a Christian group from what we now know as the Czech Republic. They followed the teachings of Jan Hus, a reformer who challenged the practices of the Catholic Church during the Bohemian Reformation. But things took a dramatic turn when Hus was executed at the Council of Constance in 1415, accused of heresy. His death didn't silence his followers. It fueled a rebellion that lasted for years. After Huss's execution, the Hussites faced waves of crusades and civil wars. Different factions within the movement fought not only against external enemies, but also among themselves, each pushing different theological beliefs. One major group, the Utraquists, eventually emerged as the dominant force after defeating a more radical faction known as the Taborites during the Hussite Wars. By the end of these conflicts, the Utraquists had the backing of the Catholic Church, making them the leading Hussite group in Bohemia. In 1485, the Peace of Kutna-Hora granted legal equality between Catholics and Utraquists in Bohemia. The Hussite influence remained strong for 2 centuries until 1620, when Roman Catholicism was forcibly reintroduced after the Battle of White Mountain during the 30 Years' War. Despite this, the Hussite legacy didn't completely fade away. Their traditions lived on in groups like the Moravian Church and the Czechoslovak Hussite Church. The movement started in the Kingdom of Bohemia and spread to other regions like Moravia and Silesia. It even reached parts of Hungary and Poland-Lithuania, but outside Bohemia it faced heavy opposition. The Hussites were often seen as rebels, especially because of the plundering reputation of their soldiers. Even though their influence didn't spread far, their ideas played a major role in shaping future Protestant movements. The Hussite movement had several branches. The largest group was the Utraquists, but there were also the Taborites, along with smaller factions like the Adamites, Orbites, and Orphans. Some of their leaders became national heroes, especially Jan Žižka, who led the Hussites through 5 crusades declared against them by the Pope. The Hussites weren't just about religion, they also addressed social issues and fueled a sense of Czech national pride. Jan Hus's story is tragic. He was promised safety by the Council of Constance, but was arrested, tried for heresy, and burned at the stake on July 6, 1415. News of his execution spread quickly, sparking outrage across the Czech lands. People saw his death as an injustice, and protests erupted against the church. King Wenceslaus IV of Bohemia initially supported Hus's followers, and even his wife openly sided with them. In response, a group of nobles formed a league to defend the right to preach freely. They agreed to follow church authorities only when their teachings aligned with the Bible. Many Catholic priests were replaced by Hussite-friendly ones, and the chalice of wine became a powerful symbol of the movement, representing their belief in communion for everyone. But things took a darker turn as tensions rose. Pope Martin V declared war on the Hussites, launching a crusade against them. King Sigismund, Hus's old rival, also sought to crush the movement. The Hussites were forced into a defensive position, but by 1427, they turned the tables and went on the offensive. They not only defended their homeland but also carried their fight into neighboring territories. Meanwhile, internal divisions weakened the Hussites. Moderate and radical factions often clashed over theology and strategy. Despite their victories, the constant infighting made it difficult for the movement to stay united. The death of King Wenceslaus in 1419 added even more chaos. Riots broke out, churches were destroyed, and monasteries were looted. Sigismund tried to claim the throne, but many saw Bohemia as an elective monarchy, not a hereditary one, so his claim was disputed. Eventually, Sigismund had to rely on force to assert his authority. For over a decade, war raged as Pope Martin V rallied Catholics to fight the Hussites. The battles were brutal. and although the Hussites initially defended their cause with great success, the constant wars took a toll. In 1430, even Joan of Arc threatened to lead a crusade against them, but her capture prevented it from happening. And after years of bloodshed and struggle, their opponents realized that defeating the Hussites by force wasn't going to work. So, they decided to try negotiating instead. The Hussites were invited to the Council of Basel in October 1431 to discuss terms. Talks officially started in January 1432, focusing on what became known as the Four Articles of Prague. The key demands from the Hussites about religious reform. But reaching an agreement wasn't easy. After back-and-forth discussions, the Bohemian Moravian Assembly finally accepted a compromise, called the Compactata of Prague, on November 30, 1433. This agreement allowed communion in both bread and wine for those who wanted it, but with a condition. It emphasized that Christ was fully present in each form, and other reforms would no longer be pushed. Preaching remained free, but priests had to be approved by church authorities. The controversial issue of whether clergy should hold political power was largely rolled back. Not everyone was happy with this compromise. The more radical Taborites rejected it completely. Meanwhile, the moderate Calixtines teamed up with the Roman Catholics and crushed the Taborites at the Battle of Lipani on May 30, 1434. After that, the Taborites faded in influence, although Hussite movements hung on in Poland for another 5 years, until Polish royal forces defeated them at the Battle of Grotniki. By 1436, the Compactata was officially recognized as law, bringing Bohemia back into the fold of the Western Church. Sigismund finally secured the Bohemian crown, but his harsh policies caused unrest. He didn't have long to enforce his rule though, as he died in 1437. Over the next few years, attempts were made to stamp out radical Hussite beliefs. In 1444, the Prague Assembly outright condemned the teachings of John Wycliffe, which had influenced Hus, as heretical. Despite this, the Hussite legacy didn't completely disappear. Many former Taborites joined the more moderate Utraquists, while others formed new groups like the Brothers of the Law of Christ. Later, in 1462, Pope Pius II declared the Compactata invalid and banned communion in both forms. King George of Podebrade, who had been recognized as king, refused to abandon the agreement, sparking the Bohemian-Hungarian War from 1468 to 1478. The religious tension persisted even after George's reign. His successor, Vladislaus II, leaned heavily toward the Roman Catholics, which made life even harder for the Utraquists. Things eventually stabilized in 1485, when an agreement at the Diet of Kutna-Hora established religious peace between Catholics and Utraquists for the next 31 years. It wasn't until 1512 that their equal rights were firmly set in law. When Martin Luther began the Protestant Reformation, many Utraquists saw similarities between their beliefs and Luther's ideas. Luther himself was surprised by how much common ground he shared with Hus's teachings. But not everyone was on board. The Utraquists split again, with some sticking to their old beliefs and others embracing Luther's reforms. Meanwhile, a group called the Unitas Fratrum had already broken off in 1457, focusing on simpler practices and strict discipline. Over time, Hussitism started to decline, especially under the Habsburgs. In 1575, Emperor Maximilian II approved the Confessio Bohemica, a statement of faith that brought together Lutherans, Reformed Christians, and the Bohemian Brethren. But this period of relative peace didn't last. Everything changed after the Battle of White Mountain in 1620. Roman Catholicism was forcefully reinstated, and Protestantism in the Czech lands was brutally suppressed. Hussite followers had to make a choice: either convert, practice their faith in secret, or leave. Many fled to other parts of Europe, including Poland, where the Brethren maintained a strong presence in the city of Leszno. Others scattered across Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Some even went as far as the Netherlands. Leaders like Jan Amos Comenius carried Hussite traditions into exile, keeping their ideas alive. By 1722, a group of Hussite descendants founded a settlement in Herrnhut, Saxony, which gave rise to the Moravian Church. Even though the Hussite movement eventually faded, its influence didn't completely disappear. It laid the groundwork for Protestantism and left a lasting mark on religious history.